the world woke up to chaos. It wasn't a political scandal or a royal announcement from Buckingham Palace. It was something far more personal, far more human, and yet, far more explosive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Thomas Markle, the father of Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, had broken his silence. After years of accusations, silence, and shame, he finally released the one thing no one expected: proof. Emails, messages, and screenshots, all revealing a side of the story that directly contradicted what Meghan had told the world. For the first time, Thomas was not just speaking, he was showing. And what he revealed sent shockwaves across the globe overnight. In the beginning, people thought it was another tabloid rumor. After all, Thomas Markle had long been painted as the estranged father, the man who sold out his daughter, the man who was left behind when she became a princess. Meghan's public image had been carefully crafted over years. A woman who overcame adversity, cut off toxic influences, and married into the most famous family on earth. She said her father had abandoned her, ignored her calls, and sold her private letters to the press. It was a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and independence. But when Thomas produced evidence suggesting that Meghan had continued to communicate with him long after her claims of estrangement, the internet erupted. What makes this moment so gripping isn't just the drama. It's the raw emotion that underlies it. Here is a father, aged and frail, who claims he watched his daughter rise to unimaginable fame and fortune, only to be cast aside. And here is a daughter, adored and scrutinized by millions, who built her identity on the notion of having broken free from a painful past. Their rift has been discussed endlessly on talk shows, podcasts, documentaries, and social media. Yet no one expected Thomas to strike back with receipts. Now, it's not just a question of who's telling the truth. It's a question of whether we've been misled all along. The video begins at the heart of this emotional battlefield. Imagine the setting. A quiet morning in California. Thomas Markle, sitting in his modest home in Rosarito, opens a folder that has sat untouched for years. Inside are old printed emails, notes, and text messages he kept, not to hurt his daughter, but to preserve the memories he thought would one day matter. "I didn't want this," he reportedly told a journalist, "but I can't sit back and let her tell the world I don't exist." That single statement spread like wildfire, igniting an overnight storm that trended across every major platform within hours. News networks picked up the story almost immediately. Hashtags like #ThomasMarkleProof, #MeghanLied, and #Markle messages began circulating before sunrise in London. Even royal commentators who had long defended Meghan paused, stunned. The Daily Mail ran a headline that read, "Thomas Markle strikes back." Meanwhile, Twitter users began dissecting screenshots allegedly showing Meghan's replies to her father. Short, polite, but unmistakably there. Some called them manipulative. Others saw them as signs of guilt or damage control. But one thing was certain. The narrative of Meghan as the abandoned daughter was now being questioned. The middle of this storm is where the emotional heart of our story lies. It's not just about gossip. It's about betrayal and perception. Think about it. 4 years, Meghan has presented herself as the victim of a difficult, distant father. She told Oprah that she lost him. She described his actions before her wedding as devastating, saying she couldn't understand why he would betray her. But Thomas's messages painted a different picture. A father who begged to be included, who tried to apologize, who reached out repeatedly only to be met with silence. In one of the leaked messages, Thomas reportedly wrote, "Meg, I love you. Please talk to me. I've done nothing but try to support you." Those words, humble and aching, cut through the noise of headlines and royal politics. Suddenly, people began asking new questions. Was Meghan protecting herself or protecting her image? Did she truly cut ties, or did she decide to rewrite history when it was convenient? These are not simple questions with easy answers, but they're the kind of questions that keep people glued to their screens, desperate for truth. The world loves a hero, but it also loves a scandal, and this one had both, wrapped inside a family torn apart by fame, pride, and silence. By the end of that first day, every major talk show and entertainment outlet had weighed in. Some framed Thomas as a manipulative opportunist seeking relevance. Others saw him as a heartbroken father who finally had enough. Yet the most haunting part of it all wasn't the media coverage. It was the silence from Meghan herself. As the evidence circulated, she said nothing. No press release, no rebuttal, no denial. Just silence. And in that silence, the story grew louder. The absence of her voice made the messages seem even more damning, even more believable. People who once defended her began to feel uneasy. Could this really be true? Could the woman who spoke so passionately about compassion, healing, and forgiveness have ghosted her own father? The contrast was jarring. In public, Meghan often spoke about her pain, her trauma, and her journey towards self-love. But these new revelations made that narrative appear one-sided. It was no longer about a victimized daughter. It was about a father who refused to vanish quietly. A father who wanted the world to know that he never stopped caring, never stopped trying. And yet, as gripping as the revelation is, it also reveals something universal. At its core, this story isn't just about Meghan Markle or Thomas Markle. It's about the fragile bond between parent and child. How easily love can become resentment. How fame can distort family into spectacle. How a misunderstanding, when fed by media and ego, can turn into a permanent scar. Viewers aren't just drawn to this story because it involves a duchess. They're drawn because they see something painfully human in it. A father reaching out, a daughter pulling away, both convinced they're right, both trapped in the narrative they've built. As this introduction draws to a close, the tension lingers in the air. Thomas has spoken, and his evidence has shaken the world's perception. Meghan remains silent, her camp offering no comment. The public is divided between those who see Thomas as vindicated and those who view him as vindictive. But one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same after this. The story has taken on a life of its own, and no amount of royal PR can put it back in the box. Before Meghan Markle became a global name, before the royal titles, interviews, and endless headlines, there was a quiet, unassuming bond between a father and daughter. It was built in the small, everyday moments. Morning drives to school, whispered encouragements backstage at school plays, and the kind of unconditional love that every parent hopes their child will never forget. Long before the world saw Meghan as the Duchess of Sussex, Thomas Markle saw her simply as his little girl, the one he called Bean. He worked long hours as a lighting director in Hollywood, not for fame or fortune, but to give his daughter the life he believed she deserved. Their home life wasn't perfect, but it was grounded in affection. Thomas was known as a quiet man, deeply private, someone who rarely spoke about himself. He was proud of his work, but prouder still of his daughter's growing talent and determination. Meghan often accompanied him to sets, fascinated by the cameras and the magic of television. She saw firsthand what hard work looked like. Her father would come home exhausted, his clothes smelling of studio lights and coffee, but he always had time to ask about her day. He never missed a moment that mattered, an old family friend once said. If Meghan had a school play or event, Thomas was there, even if it meant leaving work early and risking his job. That bond grew stronger when Meghan started dreaming bigger. When she began talking about becoming an actress, Thomas didn't discourage her. He was realistic. He knew how brutal the entertainment industry could be, but he believed in her talent. He used his contacts to help her navigate her first auditions. He helped her pay for acting classes. When she got her first small roles, he was the one behind the camera, grinning proudly as she appeared on screen. Meghan would later tell friends that her father was her biggest cheerleader. But as her career started gaining momentum, small cracks began to form. Fame, even in its early stages, has a way of testing relationships. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, and Thomas had already separated years earlier, and although they both remained in Meghan's life, the distance between them was growing. Meghan was ambitious, driven, and fiercely independent, traits that both parents admired but also struggled to understand. Thomas often worried that Hollywood would change her. He saw how easily the industry could swallow people whole. He tried to keep her grounded, reminding her that fame was fleeting and that family mattered most. Yet, somewhere between additions and rising recognition, the dynamic subtly shifted. Meghan's visits home became less frequent. Calls were shorter. She was busy, always moving from one project to another. It wasn't unusual. Many young adults drift from their parents as they chase their dreams. But for Thomas, who had been so involved in her upbringing, the distance felt heavier than he expected. He began to fear that he was losing her to a world he couldn't reach. Then came Suits, the TV show that changed everything. Meghan's role as Rachel Zane catapulted her into the public eye. For the first time, she wasn't just another struggling actress. She was a name people recognized. Thomas watched every episode religiously, recording them so he could rewatch her scenes. He'd tell anyone who'd listen, "That's my daughter." He'd beam with pride, showing off clippings and magazine covers, proud beyond words. But with that pride came a strange new tension. Meghan's growing fame brought new people into her life. Agents, stylists, producers, friends with influence. And her world began to orbit around an entirely different sun. Thomas, living a quiet life away from the spotlight, didn't fit neatly into that new orbit. He wasn't glamorous. He didn't have a PR team or a polished public image. He was, in Meghan's new world, a reminder of where she came from. A modest, working-class background that didn't blend well with the glitz of Hollywood or the refinement of royal circles she would later enter. Still, at this stage, there was no bitterness. Their relationship, though occasionally strained, was still warm. Meghan sent him cards on Father's Day. She would call him to share small victories or seek advice about her contracts. When she landed her role on Suits, she sent him gifts and thanked him for believing in her. There was love, respect, and gratitude. But there was also an undercurrent of change, a sense that something unspoken was shifting between them. Thomas began noticing that Meghan was growing more guarded. She spoke less about her personal life and more about her brand. She was mindful of her image, cautious about who she associated with. She was becoming the Meghan the world would soon know, Thomas later said in an interview. Not the Meghan I used to know. When she met Prince Harry, that transformation accelerated. Their bond, which had weathered years of ups and downs, would soon face its greatest test. But before royal titles and media scandals, there was still a semblance of normalcy. Meghan would call him from Toronto during filming breaks, laughing, telling him about the funny things that happened on set. She'd ask him about his health, about his retirement plans. Thomas, ever the doting father, would listen patiently, thrilled just to hear her voice. He often said those calls were the highlight of his week. Yet, as her relationship with Prince Harry grew more serious, those calls became less frequent. Thomas would wait by the phone, checking his messages, hoping for a text that sometimes never came. When Meghan told him about Harry for the first time, Thomas reportedly reacted with surprise but happiness. "As long as he treats you right," he told her. He wanted to be part of her journey, to meet the man who had captured her heart. But as things progressed and media attention around Meghan intensified, he began to feel that his presence was being quietly pushed aside. Invitations were delayed, communication filtered through assistants. It was as if a wall had been built between them, brick by brick, with Meghan on one side and Thomas on the other. The turning point came when wedding plans began. For Thomas, the thought of walking his daughter down the aisle at Windsor Castle was beyond anything he could have imagined. It was the ultimate father's dream, a symbol of love, pride, and unity. He bought a new suit. He practiced how he would walk beside her, what he might say before giving her away. But then came the chaos, the paparazzi photos, the staged pictures that tabloids claimed he was paid for, and the subsequent fallout. Overnight, Thomas went from proud father to global villain. Meghan's team distanced themselves. The royal machinery closed ranks. What had been a private misunderstanding became a worldwide scandal. The press painted Thomas as desperate and dishonest. Meghan, preparing for her royal wedding, found herself under enormous pressure. The palace, already wary of public relations disasters, began managing the narrative. It was easier to label Thomas as the problem than to explain the complexity of their relationship. And in that moment, something inside Thomas broke. "She stopped talking to me," he later said. "One day, I was her dad. The next day, I was a headline." Looking back at their early bond, it's hard not to feel a sense of loss. They once shared laughter, dreams, and mutual respect. Thomas wasn't perfect, he made mistakes and he admitted them, but his love for Meghan was constant. He believed their connection was unshakable, that no amount of fame or scandal could sever it. But he underestimated how powerful image and perception could become once royalty entered the equation. The tragedy of their story lies in how something so beautiful turned into something so cold. The father who once helped his daughter chase her dreams became the man she claimed abandoned her. The daughter who once adored her father became someone he barely recognized. And all the while, the world watched, taking sides in a family drama that should have been private. The calm before the fame wasn't truly calm. It was the last breath before the storm. It was the final stretch of peace before everything that mattered between them became public property. Thomas and Meghan were once inseparable, bound by shared memories, laughter, and sacrifice. But as the next chapter reveals, fame didn't just change their relationship. It dismantled it piece by piece until all that remained were fragments of the past and questions that may never be answered. When Meghan Markle's name first began to appear in royal headlines, few could have predicted how profoundly her life, and her family's, was about to change. For Thomas Markle, the moment his daughter's romance with Prince Harry became public marked the beginning of a whirlwind that would completely upend the world he knew. The relationship seemed like a fairy tale at first. An American actress who had built her career through determination and grit was now dating one of the most famous men alive. Yet beneath the charm and celebration, there was an invisible shift happening, one that would forever alter the relationship between father and daughter. In the early days of Meghan's relationship with Harry, Thomas felt pride more than anything else. He watched as news anchors speculated about his daughter's character. As the world fell in love with her smile and story, friends would call him, congratulating him on raising such a poised and intelligent woman. He responded with quiet humility, always saying the same thing, "She deserves the best." Privately, he admitted that he was nervous. Royal life was no ordinary world. He knew how the British press worked, how they could turn adoration into hostility in a heartbeat. But what he didn't anticipate was that he himself would soon become one of their favorite targets. When Harry and Meghan's relationship became official, the attention on Thomas intensified. Journalists camped outside his modest home in Mexico. Reporters tracked down relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, and paparazzi trailed him during his grocery runs. At first, he tried to avoid them, believing that staying quiet was the best thing he could do for Meghan. He didn't want to cause embarrassment. But silence, as he would soon discover, didn't protect him. It made him a mystery for the tabloids to exploit. The royal family was not known for tolerance when it came to scandals involving outsiders. Every member was expected to follow strict protocol, and every move was scrutinized. Meghan was already under pressure to prove she could fit into that world. Any misstep by her family could become ammunition for critics who doubted her place in the monarchy. As the wedding date drew closer, the tension around the Markles grew unbearable. Reporters hounded Thomas for comments, some offering money, others promising sympathetic coverage if he would only speak. He resisted at first, but the relentless pressure wore him down. Then came the fateful decision that would change everything, the staged photos. Thomas later said he regretted it deeply, claiming he only wanted to improve his image after the media had portrayed him as a recluse and embarrassment. He worked with a photographer who promised to help him look dignified, respectable, and proud of his daughter. What he didn't realize was that the story would explode, turning what was meant to be harmless into a full-blown scandal. Overnight, headlines accused him of profiting off Meghan's fame. Palace insiders reportedly called the act a betrayal. For Meghan, already overwhelmed by wedding preparations and media attacks, it was a devastating blow. In the eyes of the world, Thomas had just humiliated his daughter. To the palace, he had embarrassed the institution. And to Meghan, who had spent months navigating the delicate balance between personal life and royal duty, it felt like confirmation of her worst fears, that her father might not understand what was at stake. Communication between them became strained. Calls that once ended with laughter now ended in tension or silence. Misunderstandings multiplied. "It felt like everything I said made it worse," Thomas would later recall. "No matter what I did, I was painted as the villain." The week of the royal wedding was supposed to be the happiest time of both their lives. Instead, it became the most painful. Thomas was expected to walk his daughter down the aisle at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, a moment millions would watch. But just days before, his health deteriorated. Stress, humiliation, and the media circus took their toll. He suffered heart complications and announced he wouldn't be attending the wedding. To make matters worse, the news of his absence leaked before Meghan even had time to process it privately. The palace released official statements. Speculation spread that Meghan was furious or heartbroken. It was impossible to separate truth from fiction. By the time the ceremony took place, Thomas was in a hospital bed watching it on television, alone, far. It was in that moment, many believe, that the first true fracture between Meghan and Thomas became irreversible. Meghan's image was now intertwined with royal expectations. There was no space for mistakes, no tolerance for emotional messiness. Her father's absence, and the controversy surrounding it, had been covered by every major outlet in the world. The palace needed control, and the easiest way to regain it was to distance Meghan from the source of embarrassment. Whether consciously or not, the narrative began to change. Meghan became the dutiful daughter wronged by a reckless parent. Thomas became the estranged father who had let her down when she needed him most. The rise to royalty didn't just transform Meghan's public life, it reshaped her private one entirely. Her friends noticed the shift. She was no longer just Meghan. She was Her Royal Highness. Conversations about family became uncomfortable. Publicists, aides, and royal advisors began screening communications. When Thomas called, he was sometimes told she was busy. Emails went unanswered. "It was like she vanished into that castle," Thomas said later. "One day, we were talking about what tie I should wear, and the next, I couldn't even reach her." From Meghan's perspective, things may have looked different. The royal transition was demanding. Every move she made was dissected, criticized, and compared to Diana, Princess of Wales. The British press, initially charmed by her confidence and modern outlook, began turning hostile. Headlines grew crueler, especially when her family members in America started speaking out. Meghan may have felt trapped, caught between the royal machine and the chaotic noise of her past. It was easier to create distance than to keep defending the parts of her life she couldn't control. But for Thomas, that distance felt like betrayal. He believed the daughter he had raised, the one who used to write him loving letters and call him her best friend, had disappeared behind palace walls. "I didn't recognize her anymore," he told one reporter, his voice breaking. "It's like she became someone else the moment she became royal." He tried reaching out through mutual contacts, hoping to mend things privately, but nothing worked. The communication blackout was complete. What followed was a slow unraveling of trust. Every time Thomas tried to defend himself publicly, Meghan's camp accused him of making things worse. Every time Meghan released a statement or gave an interview, he felt his character was being attacked. Their once strong bond had become a public battleground, played out across continents. The father who had once been her protector was now her perceived adversary. The transformation from loving family to estranged strangers was now complete, and the world was watching every second of it. Yet there was a deep irony in it all. Meghan's rise to royalty was supposed to symbolize unity, love, and new beginnings. The royal wedding had been heralded as a modern fairy tale, a symbol of progress for an ancient institution. But behind that beautiful ceremony lay the silence of a father who was left out of history. As Meghan smiled for the cameras, the man who had given her everything watched from afar, invisible to the story being told. Thomas would later admit that he couldn't understand why things had gone so wrong. "I wasn't perfect," he said, But I didn't deserve to be erased. To him, the royal transformation wasn't just about losing his daughter, it was about losing his voice. The same media that had vilified him now sought him out for interviews, not because they cared about the truth, but because his pain sold headlines. He became both the victim and the scapegoat of a story too big to control. The rise to royalty wasn't just Meghan's ascent. It was the beginning of the Markle family's disintegration. The glare of global attention exposed every flaw, magnified every misunderstanding, and turned private wounds into public spectacle. What began as a love story became a family tragedy, a cautionary tale about how fame and duty can consume even the most sacred bonds. And through it all, one question lingered in the minds of millions who followed the saga. Was it truly fame that divided them, or was it choice? As we move forward into the next chapter, we'll look closer at how the carefully constructed story of estrangement became one of the most powerful narratives in modern royal history, and how it shaped the way the world came to see both Thomas Markle and his daughter. By the time Meghan Markle officially entered the royal spotlight, the world had already begun to form an opinion about her family. The story the public came to know was simple, almost cinematic. A successful, self-made woman rising from humble beginnings, estranged from a complicated father who had betrayed her trust. It was a narrative that fit neatly into a fairy tale about reinvention, healing, and newfound love. But as the years passed, that story would begin to unravel, and the carefully drawn lines between truth and performance would blur. The narrative of estrangement didn't emerge overnight. It built slowly, almost imperceptibly, through interviews, media appearances, and subtle public statements. Each one added another layer to the image of Meghan as a daughter forced to cut ties with a toxic parent for her own well-being. It began in whispers, mentions in magazine profiles and documentaries that hinted at difficult family circumstances. Then came the emotional quotes, the carefully chosen words that carried the weight of personal pain without naming names. By the time Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey in that now infamous interview, the world believed her story completely. "I grieved the loss of my father," she said softly. I lost him." That moment sealed the narrative. To the public, Thomas Markle wasn't just estranged, he was gone. But for Thomas, those words were devastating. From his home in Mexico, he watched the interview like everyone else, eyes fixed on the television as his daughter spoke about him as if he were dead. "I haven't gone anywhere," he said quietly afterward. "She's the one who stopped talking to me." His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak, not anger. It was the pain of someone erased from his own story. The man who had once raised Meghan, supported her dreams, and sacrificed for her future had become a ghost in her world. The power of Meghan's estrangement story came from its emotional resonance. People could relate to it. Millions saw her as a symbol of resilience, a woman who had set boundaries to protect herself from a painful past. It made her appear strong, independent, and empathetic, traits the public adored. Yet what no one knew then was that Thomas had kept evidence suggesting that their relationship hadn't ended the way Meghan described. Behind closed doors, communication between them had continued far longer than anyone believed. Emails, messages, and calls existed, messages that painted a far more complicated picture. The shift in public perception was massive. Meghan's story of cutting ties aligned perfectly with her new identity as a duchess. The British royal family thrives on image management, and narratives of forgiveness or distance are often strategically crafted. To many observers, the story of Meghan's estrangement felt like part of a broader strategy, one that separated her new royal persona from her American past. It wasn't just about emotional protection. It was about brand protection. Every royal figure is expected to present a curated version of their life to the world, and Meghan's image as the independent outsider fit perfectly into that mold. The press amplified the story relentlessly. Headlines called Thomas a betrayer, a sellout, a man who had cashed in on his daughter's fame. Tabloids ran stories about him selling personal letters, while Meghan's defenders painted him as a greedy opportunist. Each article deepened the wedge between them, making reconciliation less and less likely. Yet the public didn't know that many of those letters and exchanges weren't sold by Thomas at all. Some were leaked by unknown third parties, others distorted beyond recognition. When Thomas tried to speak out, his words were twisted to fit the pre-written script. The father seeking attention, the daughter seeking peace. Inside the palace, the narrative of estrangement was not only accepted, it was encouraged. Meghan's integration into royal life depended on public sympathy. The image of a modern woman breaking away from dysfunction and marrying into an ancient institution was powerful. It made her relatable, even heroic. Royal aides reportedly advised her to stay quiet, to let the story of estrangement breathe on its own. Every time Thomas spoke to the media, his words were framed as further proof that she had been right to distance herself. "They used me as the villain," Thomas said later, "and it worked." But the emotional truth was messier. Despite the public statements, Thomas still hoped to reconnect. He wrote her letters, some private, others through the press, pleading for forgiveness, for a conversation, for closure. "I love you. I miss you," he wrote in one. "You're my daughter, and I'll always be here." Those letters never received a reply. The silence became its own kind of cruelty, echoing louder than any public statement. He began to realize that their story had become larger than either of them, a machine that fed on pain and sold it to the highest bidder. The world's fascination with their estrangement grew because it reflected something universal, the heartbreak of family disconnection. People projected their own experiences onto Meghan's story. Daughters who felt betrayed by fathers, fathers who felt abandoned by children. It became more than gossip. It became emotional currency. The media didn't just report it, they monetized it, analyzing every facial expression, every silence, every symbolic gesture. When Meghan omitted her father's name in public speeches or tributes, it made headlines. When Thomas gave interviews, it reignited old wounds. The cycle never ended. And yet, beneath all the public noise, the private truth was far more complex. According to Thomas, Meghan continued to send short, polite messages even after publicly claiming they were estranged. They weren't long or warm, but they were communication nonetheless. Small, cautious gestures that hinted at a relationship that hadn't completely died. To Thomas, those messages were proof that Meghan's public narrative wasn't entirely honest. "If we were estranged," he said, "why was she still writing me?" He wasn't trying to destroy her reputation. He wanted to correct what he saw as a falsehood. But by speaking out, he only fueled more controversy. The irony of it all is hard to ignore. Meghan's claim of estrangement made her more beloved by the public, while Thomas's attempts to defend himself made him more despised. Each new revelation only hardened opinions. Those who supported Meghan saw him as manipulative and bitter. Those who sympathized with Thomas saw her as cold and calculating. In reality, both were human beings navigating an impossible situation under the harshest spotlight imaginable. It's easy to forget that before all this, they were close. Thomas had been the one she turned to when she needed advice, the one who sent her encouraging notes before auditions, the one who framed her first TV appearance photo and hung it in his house. Their estrangement didn't happen because of one fight. It was a gradual erosion caused by fame, misunderstanding, and the merciless nature of public judgment. When Meghan told the world she had lost her father, she wasn't lying in the literal sense. She had lost him, but perhaps not in the way she believed. She lost him to the noise, to the expectations of the crown, to the machinery that thrives on division and silence. For Thomas, the realization that his daughter's love story had rewritten their family history was painful. "I was the villain in a story I didn't write," he said, "and I couldn't change a single line." The more he tried to explain his side, the more he was portrayed as vindictive. Each interview, each public statement, became another brick in the wall separating them. Meghan's silence, powerful and strategic, made her appear composed and dignified. Thomas's emotion made him appear unstable. The imbalance was stark, and he knew it. The narrative of estrangement, once accepted as truth, became nearly impossible to challenge. Even when Thomas revealed the existence of messages suggesting continued contact, many refused to believe him. The public had already chosen a side. Meghan had the power of her platform, her poise, and her popularity. Thomas had only his memories, his words, and now, a folder full of what he claimed was proof. For years, he stayed silent, watching his image crumble. But as time went on, the pain of being misrepresented became unbearable. He had been patient, but patience had bought him nothing. And so, one morning, he decided that enough was enough. He opened the folder that had sat untouched for years. Inside were printed copies of emails, texts, and notes, proof he believed that Meghan had not truly cut ties when she said she had. To him, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his place in the truth. "I'm tired of being lied about," he said. "If she won't speak to me, then I'll speak for myself." That decision would set off the chain reaction that turned a years-old family rift into one of the most viral scandals of the year. The world thought it already knew the story, but Thomas Markle was about to rewrite it in his own words, and this time he had evidence that would leave millions questioning everything they thought they knew about the Duchess of Sussex and her father. When Thomas Markle decided to speak publicly, he didn't do it with the confidence of a man seeking revenge. He did it with the weariness of a father who felt pushed into a corner. Years of silence, misrepresentation, and heartache had taken their toll. What began as a quiet attempt to defend his reputation evolved into something far larger. A man reclaiming his voice after being cast as the villain in his daughter's fairy tale. And when he finally broke that silence, the world listened. It started quietly. A few tabloid journalists had reached out to him over the years, asking if he wanted to tell his side of the story. For a long time, he declined. He believed that by staying silent, he was protecting Meghan. But as time passed, the silence began to feel suffocating. Every time Meghan spoke publicly about their relationship, or lack thereof, Thomas became the subject of ridicule, called everything from greedy to untrustworthy. Even the smallest gestures were twisted by the press. When he sent her birthday cards, the headlines read, "Thomas Markle still obsessed." When he expressed pride in her humanitarian work, it became, "Thomas begs for Meghan's attention again." He couldn't win. And so, the man who had once quietly worked behind the scenes decided to step forward. The silencing of Thomas Markle wasn't a sudden event. It was a gradual process, one fueled by fear and media control. After the royal wedding scandal, palace advisors reportedly encouraged Meghan to sever all contact with her father to protect her image. In the royal world, perception is everything, and having a parent embroiled in tabloid drama was unacceptable. From that moment, Thomas's name became a liability. Every statement, every word he uttered, was filtered through the lens of PR damage control. But for Thomas, this wasn't about public image. It was about the pain of being erased by his own child. He remembered vividly the day he realized Meghan had stopped answering his calls for good. It was late evening in Mexico, and he had been trying for weeks to reach her. He dialed her number again, the familiar rhythm of the ringtone echoing in his small living room. This time, it didn't go to voicemail. It rang once and then disconnected. He tried again. The same thing happened. That was the moment it hit him. He had been blocked. "She cut me off completely," he later said. "I wasn't even worth a goodbye." He sat in silence for hours, staring at his phone, hoping it was some kind of mistake. It wasn't. When Thomas spoke about it in interviews, his pain was unmistakable. "I wasn't the one who ghosted her," he said. "She ghosted me." His words echoed through headlines worldwide. It was a simple statement, but it carried years of disappointment and rejection. He had watched as his daughter told the world he had abandoned her, while privately he claimed he had been the one left behind. For Thomas, the emotional betrayal was more devastating than any public humiliation. "She told the world I turned my back on her," he said. "But I was still right here waiting." The silencing didn't just happen through phones and emails. It happened through the media itself. Stories about Thomas were printed daily, many of them false or exaggerated. He was portrayed as a bumbling, bitter man seeking fame through his daughter's notoriety. No matter how hard he tried to defend himself, the narrative stayed the same. The royal family and Meghan's PR team had built a powerful image of her as the innocent daughter protecting herself from a manipulative parent. Any attempt by Thomas to share his perspective only reinforced the story that he was dangerous to her peace. But the truth, as he saw it, was much simpler. He wasn't trying to destroy her. He wanted closure. He wanted his daughter to tell him, face to face, why she had chosen to erase him. "If she doesn't want me in her life, fine," he said. "But I deserve to hear it from her." That simple plea, so human, so heartbreakingly ordinary, resonated with millions. People began to see a different side of Thomas. Not the caricature the tabloids created, but a grieving father trapped in a royal narrative he never asked to be part of. Still, Meghan's silence remained. For every interview Thomas gave, Meghan's representatives would release short, carefully worded statements. "The Duchess is saddened by her father's ongoing comments," one read. Another said, "This is a deeply personal matter." The palace never denied his claims, but they didn't engage either. The strategy was clear: starve the story of oxygen, and eventually it would die. But it didn't. The more Meghan remained silent, the more Thomas's words gained traction. People were drawn to the contrast. A powerful duchess with global influence, and a lonely father, sitting in a small house by the sea, speaking into the void. And then came the turning point, the one that would shatter the public's perception of who had truly silenced whom. Thomas revealed that he had kept records, emails, text messages, even voice notes, that showed he had tried to reach out to Meghan long after she claimed they were estranged. "I didn't want to have to show this," he said, holding up a printed message. "But I need people to know I'm not lying." The message, allegedly from Meghan, wasn't warm, but it was unmistakably her. It was dated months after she had told interviewers she had no contact whatsoever with her father. "How can we be estranged if she was still writing to me?" he asked. That question ignited a global debate. The release of those messages changed everything. Overnight, social media exploded. Supporters of Meghan accused Thomas of invading her privacy yet again. But others saw the situation differently. To them, the messages were proof that Thomas had been unfairly maligned. "He was silenced by the narrative," one commenter wrote. "And now the truth is finally coming out." For the first time, public sympathy began to shift. The first leaks didn't come through traditional media. They surfaced online: screenshots, snippets, and screenshots of emails that appeared to be between Meghan and her father. They weren't the warm, affectionate exchanges of a close relationship, but they were unmistakably messages between two people still in communication. The timestamps told the story. These weren't old messages from before her marriage. Some were from months after the royal wedding, and others from a period when Meghan was publicly insisting they hadn't spoken at all. The internet exploded. Some fans dismissed the screenshots as fabricated, but others saw them as the cracks in a carefully curated image. One of the most damning exchanges, according to reports, showed Meghan writing in measured, formal language, nothing like the intimate, emotional tone one might expect from a daughter to her father. "Please respect that I need space right now," one message allegedly read. "The decisions you've made have hurt me deeply, and I need time to heal." Thomas's replies were longer, emotional, pleading. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I never meant to hurt you. I just want to talk. Please call me." It was the kind of exchange that felt too real, too raw, to be entirely manufactured. Suddenly, the narrative of an estranged, uncaring father began to falter. In another alleged message, Meghan appeared to promise contact that never came. "Once things settle down, we can reconnect," she wrote. Thomas claimed that settling down never happened. The world moved on, and so did she, publicly at least. To him, these messages were proof that she hadn't cut him off when she said she did. She hadn't been honest with the public, and he had stayed quiet out of loyalty until the weight of her accusations became too heavy to bear. "I kept everything," he said. "Every message, every note. I thought one day she might need to see them again. I never thought I'd have to show them to the world." The reaction was immediate and brutal. Within hours, hashtags like #Markle messages, #Meghan exposed, and #Thomas speaks were trending worldwide. News anchors debated the implications. Was Meghan's estrangement narrative a lie? Or was Thomas twisting selective truths to paint himself in a better light? The discussion wasn't just about family, it was about honesty, image, and manipulation in the modern celebrity age. People began to question how much of what they saw from the Sussexes was real and how much was controlled. The emails and messages weren't the only evidence Thomas shared. In a follow-up interview, he revealed that Meghan had sent him a short note through a mutual contact after his heart surgery. "I was in the hospital, and she wrote something along the lines of, 'I'm sorry for what you're going through. I wish things could have been different.' It wasn't cruel, but it was cold." For Thomas, it symbolized everything wrong with their relationship. A formality where there once was warmth. "It felt like a press statement," he said, "not a daughter writing to her dad." He kept that note folded neatly in a drawer, creased from being read too many times. As the story spread, journalists rushed to verify the authenticity of the materials. Some experts in digital forensics confirmed that the metadata aligned with the timeframes Thomas claimed. Others urged caution, noting that without Meghan's confirmation, the truth could never be fully known. But in the court of public opinion, perception was already shifting. The idea that Meghan might have misrepresented her estrangement story began to take hold. Even those who had fiercely defended her started asking questions. The media frenzy intensified when Thomas agreed to appear on a televised interview. The setting was modest, a small studio dimly lit, with him seated at a plain wooden table. He looked frail but composed, his voice steady but weary. "I didn't want to do this," he began, "but I can't keep watching the world believe lies about me." He reached into a folder and pulled out printed emails. The cameras zoomed in on the paper, the faint glow of the ink catching under the studio lights. "She was in touch with me. She knew I was sick. She said she'd call. But she didn't." The host leaned forward, asking softly, "So, are you saying Meghan lied?" Thomas sighed, looking down at the papers. "I'm saying she told the world one thing and told me another." It was that moment, the visible pain in his face, the trembling in his voice, that broke the internet. Clips from the interview went viral on every platform within hours. People argued passionately online. Some accused Thomas of emotional manipulation, others accused Meghan of deception. Memes, debates, and opinion pieces flooded timelines. For a brief moment, Thomas was no longer the disgraced father. He was the man who had dared to confront a global icon with her own words. Behind the scenes, royal insiders were reportedly panicking. Meghan's team went into crisis mode, issuing quiet reminders to journalists about privacy and mental health. Archwell Foundation representatives refused to comment. The royal establishment distanced itself, reminding the press that Meghan was no longer a working royal. The strategy was clear. Ignore it, outlast it, and hope it fades. But this time it didn't fade. The proof had taken on a life of its own. Experts in public relations and media began weighing in. One analyst noted, "If Thomas's evidence is legitimate, it fundamentally undermines the authenticity Meghan has built her brand on. Her narrative of pain and healing relies on her truth being consistent." Another said, "This isn't just about a family dispute, it's about credibility." The entire estranged father story may have been used to strengthen her public persona. The implications were massive. Meghan's reputation as a voice of compassion and truth was now under scrutiny. As the dust settled, Thomas's actions sparked an even deeper conversation about the cost of silence. Many began to sympathize with his position. He wasn't a perfect man, he admitted that himself, but he was human. A father who had made mistakes, yes, but one who had also been misrepresented, ignored, and painted as disposable. "If I hadn't saved these messages," he said quietly, "no one would ever believe me." That line hit a nerve. It reminded people how easy it is for truth to be rewritten by power, how the loudest voices aren't always the most honest ones. The leaked proof also exposed the complex dynamic between personal pain and public image. Meghan had built her narrative around independence and self-protection, but now that story was being challenged by the one person who knew her longest. Whether the public believed Thomas or not, his revelations forced everyone to confront a difficult question. Where does personal truth end and public storytelling begin? For Thomas, Releasing the proof wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about reclaiming dignity. For years, he had watched strangers label him as the father who sold out his daughter. Now, for the first time, he felt the balance shift, however slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want people to know I tried." And that statement, stripped of bitterness, resonated far beyond the royal headlines. It spoke to something painfully human, the desire to be understood before it's too late. But if Thomas thought this would be the end of the story, he was wrong. The proof didn't close the chapter. It blew it wide open. The emails and messages were just the beginning. There were rumors of voice recordings, more written exchanges, even witnesses who could corroborate his claims. Each new detail only deepened the divide. What started as a plea for truth had become a global reckoning over who Meghan Markle really was behind the image. And in that growing storm, one thing became clear. Neither father nor daughter would ever see the world or each other the same way again. When Thomas Markle's revelations hit the public sphere, the world reacted like it always does in the age of instant outrage, with shock, disbelief, and division. Overnight, social media turned into a battleground. On one side were those who believed that Thomas had finally exposed the truth, the father whose reputation had been unfairly shredded by years of calculated PR. On the other were those who accused him of exploiting his daughter once again, of crossing an irreversible line by revealing private communications. The internet had never been kind to the Markles, and now it had found new fuel for chaos. Within hours, hashtags were trending worldwide. Hashtag Team Thomas began to surge, fueled by supporters who felt that the media had unfairly villainized him. "He was silenced for too long." One viral tweet read, "If a mother showed proof like this, people would be praising her courage." Others countered with hashtag Protect Meghan, accusing Thomas of manipulation and emotional blackmail. "She's been through enough," a prominent journalist wrote. "This is nothing more than public cruelty disguised as honesty." The debate wasn't just loud, it was personal. People projected their own family conflicts onto the story, turning a private father-daughter rupture into a moral argument about truth, loyalty, and betrayal. Television networks seized the moment. Morning shows dissected the messages line by line, inviting body language experts and psychologists to analyze every nuance. One British host declared, "This isn't just a family feud, it's a credibility crisis." Another countered, "It's a desperate father trying to reclaim dignity." The back and forth mirrored the split of public sentiment. Meghan's defenders saw her as a woman protecting her peace from a manipulative parent. Thomas's supporters saw him as a broken father punished for telling the truth. The polarization was so intense that it almost resembled a political divide. Tabloids ran the story relentlessly, updating every hour. Some published sympathetic portraits of Thomas, the aging father living alone, looking out at the ocean, haunted by memories of the daughter he'd lost to fame. Others painted him as a bitter man obsessed with the past. "He won't stop until he ruins her," one columnist wrote. But others began to question the narrative that had defined Meghan for years. "If she really cut him off," one piece asked, "why were there still messages months later?" It was a question that lingered across breakfast tables and newsrooms alike. The ripple effect extended far beyond the gossip columns. Cultural commentators began drawing parallels between Meghan's situation and the broader issue of image-making in the celebrity world. "We've entered an era where truth is curated," one essay argued. Celebrities and royals alike manage their narratives like brands, and when those narratives clash with personal reality, the fallout is explosive. Meghan's story had once been about survival, about triumph over adversity, independence, and the cost of fame. Now it was being re-examined as a story about control, and whether authenticity can exist in a world where every detail is mediated through publicists, advisors, and media handlers. Meanwhile, Thomas watched all this unfold from his home in Rosarito. He didn't gloat. Those who spoke to him described a man who seemed more tired than triumphant. "He doesn't seem like he's celebrating anything," one acquaintance said. "He just seems relieved that people are finally listening." But for Thomas, the relief was bittersweet. He knew that even though he had shown his proof, the court of public opinion could never be fully won. Meghan's global influence, her connection to Hollywood and royalty, meant that many would never believe him no matter what he presented. He had stepped into a war he could not win. Not against his daughter, but against a machine built to protect her. The royal sphere, as always, reacted cautiously. While Buckingham Palace maintained its usual silence on personal family matters, palace insiders reportedly expressed quiet concern. The Sussex brand was already fragile, one royal correspondent commented. This adds another layer of controversy. Others speculated that King Charles and Prince William, who had long distanced themselves from the ongoing Sussex drama, were frustrated that another scandal involving Meghan was dominating the headlines. Royal aides reportedly described it as a PR nightmare without a cleanup strategy. But among the public, sympathy began to shift in subtle but noticeable ways. For years, Meghan had commanded near-universal empathy as the woman who challenged the monarchy, endured racism in the British press, and spoke boldly about mental health. But now, her credibility was under quiet scrutiny. It wasn't that people suddenly stopped believing in her struggles. It was that they began to wonder what else had been edited, omitted, or reshaped to fit the narrative. If she lied about her father, one headline bluntly asked, what else has she lied about? It was a cruel question, but it resonated. The reactions weren't all harsh. Some saw tragedy rather than scandal. This isn't about lies, one opinion writer argued. It's about pain. A father trying to be heard and a daughter trying to survive in a world that feeds on their wounds. That perspective resonated with older viewers and readers who had seen families torn apart by pride, misunderstanding, or public shame. They saw in Thomas and Meghan's story the reflection of their own fractured relationships. The ache of love mixed with resentment, the confusion of wanting to forgive but not knowing how. As the story spread, celebrities and public figures weighed in. Piers Morgan, a longtime critic of Meghan, called the revelations predictable but devastating, claiming that the truth always finds a way out. In contrast, others defended Meghan fiercely, insisting that Thomas's decision to go public was the ultimate act of betrayal. Even among Meghan's Hollywood allies, the tone shifted from solidarity to silence. Some feared being caught on the wrong side of public opinion. Others suspected that the full story hadn't yet emerged. One of the most striking reactions came from ordinary people who had once idolized Meghan as a symbol of empowerment. I used to think she was untouchable, one viral comment read. But now, I just see two people who need healing. That statement captured what many felt but few said aloud. That beneath the spectacle, the Markle saga had lost its glamour and become something raw, something painful, something deeply human. The internet, of course, thrives on polarization, not empathy. Some users began combing through old interviews, searching for inconsistencies in Meghan's statements. Clips from her Oprah interview resurfaced, now viewed through a different lens. Every pause, every glance, every carefully chosen word was analyzed. When she said she hadn't spoken to her father in years, one user posted, was she lying? Or was she redefining what speaking means? The debate spilled into podcasts, talk shows, and Reddit threads, where people dissected the situation like amateur detectives. Meanwhile, in Britain, newspapers that had once been accused of bias against Meghan found themselves vindicated in the eyes of some readers. We were called racists and liars for reporting what we knew, one editor said. Now it turns out we were just early. But not everyone bought into the redemption arc for the British tabloids. Many still saw them as opportunists who had profited from destroying a woman's reputation and then switched sides the moment it suited them. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on anyone. What made the public reaction so fascinating was how it transcended the Markles themselves. It became a reflection of society's relationship with truth in the digital age. People weren't just debating who was right or wrong. They were debating whether truth even mattered anymore. Could a daughter be both wronged and dishonest? Could a father be both flawed and truthful? The lines blurred, and in that blur, the Markle saga became less about royalty and more about the fragility of modern relationships under the weight of global attention. Through it all, Thomas remained strangely calm. He appeared on a few more talk shows but refused to release anything further. I've said what I needed to say, he told one host. The rest is up to her. He looked older than before, his voice quieter. When asked if he thought Meghan would ever forgive him, he hesitated. "I don't know," he said, "but I've forgiven her. I have to. She's my daughter." It was a moment of vulnerability that cut through the noise. An aging man, weary of being misunderstood, still clinging to hope even as the world turned his family's pain into content. The internet moved on eventually, as it always does. But something in the public perception of Meghan Markle had shifted permanently. The woman once seen as the embodiment of authenticity was now viewed with skepticism. For the first time, doubt lingered in her shadow. And for Thomas, though vindicated in some eyes, the victory felt hollow. "You don't win when your child hates you," he said quietly. "There's no victory in that." In the days that followed, one journalist summed it up best. "This isn't the story of a daughter versus her father. It's the story of what happens when love becomes public property." The truth, whatever it was, no longer belonged to either of them. It belonged to the world. Dissected, debated, and distorted beyond recognition. And in that brutal transformation, both Thomas and Meghan lost something they would never get back. The private bond that once made them father and daughter, not headlines and hashtags. Meghan Markle's response to her father's bombshell was not a press conference, nor a tearful interview, nor a defiant statement through a spokesperson. It was silence. And in that silence, the world leaned in closer. Because when someone as media-savvy as Meghan chooses not to speak, the absence of words becomes its own kind of performance. People waited for hours, then days, expecting an official comment or even a social media post. None came. Instead, paparazzi captured photos of Meghan walking with Prince Harry near their Montecito home. Expression unreadable behind large sunglasses, holding a coffee cup as though the world around her wasn't on fire. It was a deliberate calm in the midst of a storm. Her team knew how to control a narrative, sometimes by saying nothing at all. But silence is a double-edged sword. It can project confidence and composure, or it can be mistaken for guilt. Meghan's silence gave the story oxygen. Every hour she didn't respond, headlines multiplied. Meghan refuses to engage with father's claims. Markle team goes quiet amid leak scandal. Palace insiders stunned at silence. For a woman who had spent years talking about the importance of using your voice, her decision not to use it now became the loudest statement of all. Behind the scenes, the crisis team at Archwell Foundation was working overtime. Damage control wasn't new to Meghan. She had faced negative press before, from her royal exit to accusations of bullying palace staff. But this was different. This wasn't an anonymous critic or tabloid rumor. This was her father, the man whose name and face were now plastered across the internet, holding up what he called the proof that she had lied. Advisors reportedly urged restraint. Engaging directly with Thomas's claims, they warned, would only reignite the fire. If she denies it, one insider explained, he'll release more. If she admits it, the press will crucify her. The only winning move is not to play. And so Meghan stayed silent, at least publicly. But behind closed doors, those close to her said she was shaken.